Please say your name.
Dr. Charlayne Grenci.
And what do you do?
I'm a clinical sexologist,
And what is a sexologist?
somebody that studies human sexual behavior,
And how long have you been doing that?
probably since birth, but since 1980.
And what got you interested in sexology?
The upbringing I had with my mom, she was heavy into studying psychology, her mental illness, and then suicide attempt, my grandmother's suicide, and then becoming involved in the fetish world, the leather world, giving sessions to men, learning all about their sexuality to do with fetishes, paraphilias, fantasies, character role play, etc.
And when you discovered these things and when you became interested in those things, how did you proceed professionally? What were the steps that you took to develop your career?
I started in 1980, January 80, and I became a dominatrix, which people say, how is that credible? Well, the difference between my study and sessions in domination were that before every session, they were interviewed. After every session, I interviewed them again to find out what was going on. Why were they here? Why were they interested in those particular fantasies and fetishes? What was when was their first interest? So I was basically doing something similar to what Kinsey was doing back in the 40s and 50s and didn't know it. Because most dominatrixes would get them in, whip them, paddle them, spank them, or whatever, do the role play, and get them out. I didn't care how long they stayed. I wanted to pick their brain. I wanted to learn about them from childhood all the way up.
And what made these men seek out a dominatrix?
Well, many things. Most of them probably because they could not get this type of role play with their wife or girlfriend. I found that especially in the 80s, mostly. Well, it's still today, but most of them, that's what they said. I can't, and some of them have said, I approached her with this, she freaked out, or others said, no, I can't because I'll end up getting a divorce. So they were very afraid to disclose their personal, their deep-seated interests in fantasy, fetish, paraphilias, or character role play as a submissive slave. They couldn't do it with their partners.
And their partners just weren't open to exploring what their spouses required.
The ones that dared even disclose that to them, yes, they weren't open. Most of them, no.
And in your research and in your studies, because you have numbers of degrees, which we'll get into, what did you find out about the importance of sexology, the study of human interactions on the most intimate levels as it relates to our society in general?
What was the question?
As you studied,
Yes.
as you went to school and got degrees,
Okay.
how did you find that this related to the society at large?
Well, actually, in the classes, I had more to offer to the classes than any of the other students because I had already a realm of one side of society that they hadn't been exposed to. So I ended up giving lectures to my own classes that I was in, getting degrees for as well. The doctor would always have me do that. What I found, he would touch on paraphilias and talk about that. That's when I would get up and do my thing, when that area of the subject was at hand. But it tied in very well because it's all about men's sexuality. And then as I, opened Command Performance in 1991.
And to tell us what Command Performance was.
Okay, Command Performance was the first dungeon fetish club in Florida. It was not easy to open that one because of what had happened in the 80s, but I knew there was a need for it. And So people would come through my door, mostly singles, but then couples started gravitating in. So what I saw, the difference in the 80s and 90s there, more people were coming out of the closet. More people were coming above ground. It wasn't so hidden like it was in the 80s. And then we had couples coming in, and they wanted to play on the equipment or have instruction. And I gave a lecture before each little, each meeting, each session. And then I let them go and, feel free to play on the equipment. So I watched and observed a lot there too. So now I'm getting the 80s information from the single men I saw in sessions, and now the singles and couples that were interacting with submissives, mistresses that I hired, and the couples that came in to play with each other, and their questions and answers of what was going on.
How much?
All human behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how much of your work was on heterosexual, and how much of your work was in the LGBTQ field?
Oh, it was all over the board. Especially in the 90s and up to the present time. In the 80s, not so much, because you didn't have gay people coming through my door to see a dominatrix. All right, you had men from all over the world, because I was the only show in town, so to speak. In the 90s, yes. And I started, I did one, I remember one session with a gay Jewish group, I believe, of men in Miami. We took a limo down there, and I talked to them. That was in 1990, I think. And right before I opened the club. And then in the meantime, I was doing sessions at a restaurant with different people that just wanted to talk to me at $200 an hour. Okay, that worked from once I got out of jail, from 88 to 90. So I met a person that wanted to finance the first, business I wanted to go into after that.
Okay, now that you've brought up jail, we can't let
shoot.
that go.
Okay.
So how did
It's
you end
like-
up in jail? How did you end up in jail?
Because we're going all around the place. February 4th of 1983, my house was raided by the Broward Sheriffs and the Pompano Beach Police because I was a dominatrix. I was doing sessions there. I had been doing sessions since January of 1980. They didn't like that.
And so you were arrested, and then what happened?
And not right away, not for the first 30 days. They let us just hang. And they tried to come back 30 days later, and our attorney said, don't go home. And that was the day they wanted to raid my house again. But I went through about 5 years of the Broward County court system for this. And because I was living with, in a gay lifestyle, they first tried to turn my partner against me, turn state's witness against me. And then my attorney says, you can't do that. You can't do that. They're partners. So, I had to get on the stand and talk a lot about different things. And, I defended the gay community as well, the LGBT community, because the freedom of expression goes across the board, whether you're coming to a dominatrix to express your character role play or your lifestyle. To me, they're all the same. If you don't have that freedom of expression, you don't have anything.
And so you went through the court case. You were sentenced to
3 months in jail, 90 days in jail, and 500 hours community service. They took away all my rights and threatened me with 30 years in prison just for being a dominatrix. That was the way it was back in the day.
And what was your community service?
I worked with the county nurse on Broward Boulevard, and she said, Charlayne, I want you to know that you're probably the only one that gets this position. And I said, why is that? She said, because you're different than all the others that have been arrested. You've had a lot of private school training. You're smart, and because they couldn't trust somebody else in there around everybody's records, all the county employees' records and everything. So that's where I did my community service.
So you got a good job.
I got a good job. Didn't pay well though.
Yeah. But it got you out of trouble.
Yes, it did. Mm-hmm.
And leading up to that and post that, you studied. And
Always studying, yeah. Always doing research on people. Mm-hmm.
What was the most interesting degree of all the degrees that you have, or did one lead to the next?
one led to the next. But, it was, everything has been really interesting. My whole life has been a movie, really. It's been full of drama and because I'm a colorful character, they say, people come up to me everywhere I go. Who are you? What do you want? What are you here for? Or whatever. I got banned from gay bars or a lesbian bar a couple times when I was a dominatrix even.
Tell us that story.
Well, when I went in with some flyers on my club and put them on the bar, it was a bar right there by 26 and Wilton Drive. I mean, US 1 and 26. And it's not there now. It was a lesbian bar. And there was a girl there. She was rather intoxicated. And she looked over at the flyers, not knowing who I was, not knowing I was, I belonged to them. We don't want your kind in here. Take that stuff and go. And when I became a dominatrix, I lost most of my gay friends as well, back in the 80s.
And why do you think that was?
Because they said, you're nothing but a hooker with a whip.
So
said,
they
really?
So they really didn't understand.
They were very
what you were...
No, they didn't understand. They were very judgmental, and I tried to explain to them and everything, and eventually they came back. But even ever since then, and I've done a lot of guest speaking at different lesbian bars, and I've counseled, had ads in their publications for counseling for couples or singles in the gay and lesbian community for relationship issues, because I consider myself a relationship expert because of across the board I know experience, and it's.
I mean, because you're really dealing with the most intimate aspect of human relationships.
Yes.
And if there's a problem there, a relationship is not likely to work.
Correct.
So you're really a healer.
I consider myself that. Mm-hmm.
And when did you realize that this was your calling?
Oh, my goodness. Probably back in the 80s, when people would just walk up to me from anywhere I was, any store or whatever, and just start divulging their life story to me. People I didn't even know, and asking my advice. I'm thinking, why'd they do that? And then my partner from 93, she witnessed this a few times. She said, oh my God, wow, I've never seen that before. I said, this happens a lot.
Now, with your upbringing, you're from New England.
Bangor, Maine. Mm-hmm.
So this was not a common thing there.
No.
Or certainly not an obvious thing there.
No.
How did you get introduced to this world?
Well, I moved to Florida and finished my last 2 years of private high school here. That's how. I wasn't in Maine anymore.
So you were introduced to this world in Florida.
The LGBTQ
Right.
world? In Florida, yes, definitely in Florida.
And when did you find out about dungeons and whips and that kind of...
That kind of activity? A friend of mine owned an escort agency. And she called me one day and said, come over, I want you to have a glass of wine with me. And I did. So I said, how's your business? She said, it's good. And the phone was ringing off the wall. This is in December 79. And she kept answering, talking, and came back. I said, what's going on, Kelly? She said, these are dudes that want domination. I said, what's that? What are you talking about? When she told me, I thought she was crazy. I didn't get that at all. I really didn't. And when she told me what they wanted, I thought she was crazier. And they were even, I said, that's crazy. She said, but you can make good money. And I said, I'd have to learn a lot more. So she told me some things to do. And she gave me a crop and some rope. And she said, dress like you normally do when you go out. You wear boots and you wear black a lot and all that and leather, whatever. Dress like that. I said, okay. And she said, this is December 79. She says, I get $200 an hour, you'll get half of it. I said, oh, that'll save the mortgage. Okay. That's how I got into it. Not knowing what I was doing at all. Freaking out when I saw these men crawling around the floor. but knowing there's a lot of psychology crawling around that floor. I want to know what's going on. I've always been very inquisitive about everything, you know, most of my life.
And is that part of what encouraged you to go back for degrees?
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely. The 80s, with all that, yes.
And what was your first degree?
The first bachelor's, then master's, then...
Right, but what were they in?
Well, I went to Marymount College first, okay? I don't even like to talk about the first couple, you know, going on there. Because it was a nuns' school, I wasn't Catholic, and a lot of weird shit going on, you know. But so I don't talk about that. I only talk about the last two because that's pleasant memories.
Okay, so talk about the last two.
Okay. Last two, Maimonides University. It was in Miami, but they had classes in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And Dr. Grenci, who I met in 1999, who was the president of Maimonides, I met him in I think they were doing a gay leather, not in the Ramrod, but somewhere over here. But this is so long ago. See, I forget the name of the bars because they've changed names. And he was a judge, and they had asked me to be a judge. That's how I met him in 99. And when he heard my life story, he went, "Oh, you need to go back to school. You need to share all that with everybody. You have a wealth of knowledge right now." So it took a couple years, and I eventually went back.
And he was a mentor?
Yes, he was a mentor up until a couple years ago when he passed, yes. He was a mentor for over 20 years, not only at school as a professor, but even on the side. He liked me, so every time he came from Orlando down to Fort Lauderdale, you know, he took me to dinner so he could pick my brain. But I was actually picking his too. So it was a good mutual relationship. I learned a lot from him.
Who else in your life acted in that capacity?
Dr. Timothy Mulroney. He just heard about me through the newspapers. And he said, "Aren't you Mistress Carla?" I said, "Yes." He recognized me from a newspaper clipping. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "May I come sit next to you?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he told me to tell him my story, and I did. And he talked me into starting to do guest lectures at his classes at Nova.
And that was in the graduate school?
Yeah, Nova Southeastern.
Right, but I mean for graduate students?
Yes, for, master's and PhD programs in human sexuality and psychology. Yeah, so.
Out of everything that you've done, what do you think has had the most impact on the people that you've worked with?
The most impact. That I'm non-judgmental, and I allow them to express their ideas, their feelings, and their sexuality with no problem in front of me. And I will give advice if they want it, but I will not be negative to them in any way, because you really can't. You can't, because you don't know what you're going to say. We were taught this. You don't know what you're going to say that may be a trigger that's going to make them go, you know, have a bad experience with you instead of a good one. So you have to tread very lightly that way. So I know I've helped an awful lot of people, not only in my guest lectures around the country and in the clubs and in the yearly national conventions, but in private sessions in my offices.
And there are people, when you look back at history of sexology, you know, you mentioned Kinsey, there was Johnson and Masters.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yes. When I took Bruce Randall as my attorney for the court case in the 80s, he flew me out to LA and San Francisco to look up some expert witnesses for our trial. First, he took me to San Francisco to the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, where Dr. Wardell Pomeroy was, who co-authored the Kinsey Report, and Dr. Charles Mosier. And I interviewed them, and they interviewed me. It was quite interesting, actually. Pomeroy looked at Mosier at one point, and I'll never forget this, and he said, what, we're going to ask her that question. He was quite old and ill at this time. And then Pomeroy looked at me and goes, Mistress Carla, in a domination session, who was control, the dominant or the submissive? Now, this is a question that was asked to me in the summer of 1984 now, right? I said both. They both have responsibility in that. I said one has, they have to have an agreement, and there has to be a code word. And Pomeroy looked at Mosher and said, oh, I guess we're both wrong, because one of us said dominant, one said submissive.
And in what you said, with both having responsibility
Yes,
and a code word, so you know when you've gone too far.
right.
Does that come up when they're doing their preliminary interview?
It should. Couples that engage in BDSM activities, if they're doing it correctly, should negotiate in the beginning. Not just go right into session and da-da-da. No, you're supposed to negotiate and sit down and talk. And you're supposed to, the submissive, or the one playing the sub role, is supposed to give their limitations to the dominant. If the dominant doesn't go by it, then to me, it's not a consensual session anymore. To me, that would become abuse.
And
There's a fine line.
And that makes perfect sense. And this is really about improving communication skills.
Yes.
And if you don't listen to that, then you're not listening to anything.
Exactly, Robert, yes.
So in the scheme of things, since this is, the fetish world is probably not the majority of people, not that
Right.
they don't think about it or what have you, but don't participate.
Right.
How much do we limit ourselves by not understanding this other world?
Well, I think it's a big enough part of society that everybody should at least know about it. They don't have to engage in it, but I think it's important enough to know about it, because from my understanding and my experience through the years, so many people go through life not knowing. Their brother may have been into it, their father, their uncle, their mother, they don't know. And if people don't express it and explain it and teach it so that it's not this horrible thing that, that's happening to one of their loved ones, there needs to be a lot more education about it, actually. I've tried to educate the police enforcement. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. In fact, I even tried when last November, a year ago, my roommate, not my partner, my roommate tried to commit suicide. But because I was home, and the cops and the paramedics come and everything, what they do is, because I was home, they made me sit outside, and they called it a homicide investigation.
Ooh.
Oh, yes. People don't know that either. I thought that was important to tell, because people don't know that. I mean, so if a husband falls off a stool or something, and the wife is there, I hope they don't do that to the wife. But that's what happens. They didn't. So they took our VCR, because we have cameras inside and outside the house, and didn't give it back for a week. And they had to wait till she came out of her coma and all that, which she did, and asked her. Of course, didn't have anything to do with it. I was asleep. I woke up and found her, gurgling in the shower, laying in the shower. I saved her life, but it's what it is.
How has your work impacted your life within the LGBTQ community?
How has my work with them, with
yourself?
Well, I was when Sir Tom was alive, and Leatherworks, of course, knows me very well. All right, the Ramrod people. I would go in there and either do scenes or enter their contests or whatever. Okay, I was as a judge in a lot of their contests too over here. And Leatherworks would hold meetings and have events. I was always available. And Eric Lawrence, who died a few years ago, would always call me, Mistress Carla, you need to come and do this. Well, one time they called me down for a meeting that all the dominant leaders of the gay community were going to meet with, because the gay men had been raided in Hollywood, I think, at a private party. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to all of them. And a lot of doms were in there, and straight and gay. And I'm listening, okay? And I said to Montoya, whatever his name was there, leading it, I said, I'd like to talk, because the message isn't getting across. This is many years ago, right? And he said, Mistress Carla, you have the floor. So I stood up and I addressed the leathermen that were over there, gay leathermen. And he was just irate. Why are they harassing us? We were doing this in our own home. Why? And I said, the main reason is you were doing it outside in your backyard. You said you had a condo right next door. There were old people up there that complained. I don't care if it's, you all think it's normal, all right? That old couple up there in that condo looks there and they don't see that as normal. They're going to call the cops. They went. So I said, if you don't want harassment by the cops, keep all your play indoors behind closed doors. I had to tell them. I mean, it's like, you would think they would know this stuff, but they don't. They just didn't. So I went to several different meetings, and as a judge or as a spokesperson, had to explain to the gay community, the community, even the lesbian community, what to do and what not to do. So it just doesn't come naturally to them, the do's and the don'ts, or how the law is so against it. Because they really do somehow attach the BDSM world with serial killers. Yes.
And is that true today as
yeah,
well?
Sure it is. Because when they find a serial killer that has a dungeon and those leather masks and the bondage and the torture equipment and everything, and if they go into a play party or whatever like that, that's what they're going to see. You see, they can't. And several times, cops would stop me when I left Command Performance just to follow me, just to see what I had on. Okay? And when my competitor got me raided in that business, I went over right across the street to the Broward Sheriff's Office with my book, and I said, I would like, a female came out, I said, I would like to know if any of your officers would like to purchase my book. It has a lot to do with the police in Florida. And she grabbed it out of my hand. And she walked in, she's gone, comes back, and she goes, no, but you can leave it with us. So I grabbed it out of her hand. And I said, I would like very much to be able to come down and speak to everybody and explain this whole, society. They don't want anything to do with it either. They never want to hear, they never want to learn. I've tried.
Is there any representation in film or television that gives an accurate portrayal of this lifestyle, or is it like it was in the 70s and 80s when they would portray LGBTQ people as well?
There are, I think, documentaries now I've seen, just bits and pieces, late at night usually, that show, it properly done. 50 Shades of Grey was the worst example on the planet. That showed a sexual sadist. Not everybody in that scene is a sexual sadist. I'm not. Never was. Most of them aren't. But that's what it showed.
And that's so it's gratuitous when they show this on television shows. It's always because they're looking for sensationalism, and in real life it's not about sensationalism.
Correct. I did a sex talk show on TV with Larry Siegel. That's on video as well. You can see that. And that was explaining to the public in 1994 you know, the do's and don'ts, and we had people calling in and stuff. So, you know, I've done a lot with that, trying to educate people, both in student bodies and groups and clubs and stuff like that. I'm an educator, and that's what I'll always be, as an educator. That's what I want to be remembered as, somebody who wants to help people, teach people. I don't want to take this to the grave. I want to give it to as many people as I can while I'm still here.
And what do you think is the most important lesson that's sitting in your head right now?
It's sitting in my head. Oh my goodness, there's several. The important lesson to give somebody is to open your mind. Don't be the traditional judgmental partner, friend, mother, father, because you don't know really who is sitting next to you a lot of times. You just don't know. And that person might need your compassion, your understanding. And if they don't have it, it may not end up well for them. Just like a lot of young men have, killed themselves because they weren't accepted, gay men, because they weren't accepted by their parents or in society. My partner's brother died of AIDS in California in the 80s because her parents would not accept him as a gay man. So I think acceptance, if you love somebody, accept them for who they are, and just try to be open-minded. Try to be compassionate, have empathy.
Can that be taught?
No, not too well. Not too well, especially if they have Asperger's. But I guess you can try. You can try. But people if they have a soul, you have compassion and empathy. If you don't, you can't teach them. You can't teach them that, no. You can talk about it. You have to share your feelings about it, and hopefully they catch on and get it, but some people just don't have the capacity.
So in the LGBTQ world, there's coming out day, where you try to coax people to admit that they're gay or lesbian or bi or trans or whatever.
Right.
And what we have learned is that the more people that come out, the more acceptable that world becomes, because, as you said, you know that it's your brother, it's your sister, it's your mother, it's your father, it's your neighbor, it's the person who works down the street, it's your teacher. Would that be the same for people who participate in the things that we're talking about here? If more people knew that it was people that they know, would it not carry the same stigma?
Possibly not with them, but with the old lady next door who doesn't know anybody that's gay or into BDSM or wears leather. You're not going to change her unless you're a good friend of hers and you can sit down and talk to her and say, Mabel, just hear me out here, and just sit down and talk to her. But if she's one of those neighbors that has no communication with you or anybody like you, she's not going to change her mind. So it's usually with the people that have exposure, like you said, to somebody else, learns their brother is gay, or learns their, this is a hard one, their father is a cross-dresser. I don't think I could have handled that. I'm sorry. I don't think I could have handled that as my dad was. But, because he was that old school Italian, But it's when it happens in your own family like that, I think my brother might be, I don't know. I guess I don't want to go there. It depends.
So if you were sitting down with someone and it was someone who you felt comfortable with,
Yes.
what would you say to them to get them to understand what you're doing is not harmful but actually helpful?
Yes.
And what would you say to them to get them to understand you better?
Are you talking about the BDSM activities?
Yes.
Okay. You explain to them, first of all, it's a mind game. The character role plays are mind games. And when a person can shut off their regular everyday thoughts and go into role play, that actually is therapeutic. It's mentally and emotionally therapeutic because it's an escape. It's a mind escape. And that's just as healthy as getting a shot in the arm, maybe more so, because it all starts up here, okay? And so if you could explain to them on a health issue and describe to them that it's a healthy thing to do when it's done right. But then again, that goes across the board too, because sports, activities, anything can be done wrong, dangerously. So if you take that activity and put it in a box and say, oh, no, that's wrong, that's done wrong, it's because some people do it wrong, just like some people do other things wrong and dangerously. It has to be done right. It has to be done consensually and I think, within reason. I have seen a lot of things come through my door that I didn't even approve of, to be honest, because I have my limitations. Things I wouldn't engage in, number one, and I understood why they were doing what they were doing. I saw things in Chicago and the big leather conventions that were put on by the gays, and I went to them as well in the early 90s, and I saw things in those big 10,000 square foot warehouses that they were doing that was hard to handle. But they're into it, you know, scalpel cutting and the pinning and the putting their package on a board and it turns blue and then they pin it and all the stuff that I don't want to get into real heavy here, but things that I wouldn't do, nor do I think is healthy. Because if they pin somebody peripherally all around the whole body, okay, which I saw. And then we heard later she ended up in the emergency room because when they took the pins out, she started bleeding profusely. To me, that's wrong. It's now you're doing something that's not healthy, that's dangerous.
So there, in everything, there are lines.
Yes, there are. And some people abide by that, and some people don't, in everything.
And when you draw lines, are you being judgmental, or is it something else?
I draw lines where I think it becomes unsafe, unhealthy, you know. But to those people, it's worth the risk, and it's not unhealthy. They think it's healthy. For them, they have, you know, I've never felt so, I've heard this. I never felt so good after a scene like that. Okay, fine. I understand that. But to me, it's still over the top. It's still unhealthy. Something could have gone wrong.
And in some cases,
And in some cases, it
wrong.
does, yes.
So this is still a mind game.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's like people who walk across hot coals, or people who do these dives where they hold their breath and they go, and some people don't come back.
Right. Right.
And it's knowing where those lines, and they do get a thrill.
Yes.
So
exactly.
all of these things. Now, in the course of your work, have you ever witnessed people needing to go further in order to get the same thrill that they got in a previous experience?
Yes. The people, especially that are into S&M, a lot of times they want to increase their limits.
So eventually
See
you
how
push.
That you just first you warn them that, you know, if they want real heavy S&M, like some of them were coming to pay for, you're going to have welts, you're going to have bruises, you're going to have that. You're going to be able to hide that from your wife, your girlfriend, your doctor? You know, I mean, this is a risk because your skin can only take so much. So you had to tell them all that. Then it was up to them to make the choice. But there were certain things I would not do no matter what. I've had phone calls from people out of country and around the country asking me to do things, and they would pay me exorbitant amounts of money to do, and I wouldn't do it.
So it's all part of psychological.
Mm-hmm.
It's all part of a certain kind of communication.
Yeah.
But at some point, the psychological need of that person far exceeds what could ever be met by some kind of physical action.
Yes.
Because they're always going to need more, which means that they're not really addressing the psychological problem that got them there in the first place.
Well, some of them will only go a certain, and they'll stop. If their pain level on a, like say from 1 to 10 is a 4 or 5, that's probably as far as they're going to go. Some people, every individual comes through those doors is different, every single one. Some of them, they keep wanting to increase their limitations. Others, no.
But is it the pain tolerance that determines why you're doing it? Or is it the pain tolerance that allows you to keep going, but you're not necessarily addressing the psychological issues that brought you there to begin with?
All of the above. It's a very complex thing. A scene is a very complex thing. It touches
so explain what a scene is.
The scene is, the scene laid out is if somebody comes in, they want bondage and discipline. That's a scene. Or if they want just to be put in, tied up and hit with a paddle. That's a different scene. You can have several scenes in 1 hour session, depending upon what they like. Or a cross-dresser, which is usually a straight man. It's another thing people don't understand. You hear it on TV all the time. Oh, he's queer. No, he's not. He's straight, and he likes to... Drag queens are different than cross-dressers. Transvestites are different than cross-dressers, than gay men, than drag queens. But the straight community doesn't have enough education to be able to differentiate. Back in the early 70s, there was a law here that if a man got caught with less than 3 pieces of male clothing, a cop could pick him up and arrest him. That doesn't apply now.
No, but they did pull out a law recently from 1940s that say men are not allowed to dress as women in Florida.
Oh, jeez. Drag queens are going to be out of business then, aren't they?
That was one of the things that they were going after was you could lose your liquor license if you have drag queens.
Oh, for gosh sakes.
Because they're breaking the law.
This is so crazy. Well, this state, Yeah.
So when you look back at your life, and you're too young to be doing that now.
Thank you.
What is the one thing that you would most likely say was the accomplishment that you are most proud of?
My PhD. And I'm sad that my parents never lived long enough to see me go back to school and go to the end like that. Because my father graduated from NYU, my mother from Edgewood Park College in New York, both from New York, and the education was very important to them. And my mother died in 1973, so she didn't get to see anything. My father in 2001, and that hurts, but I made myself do it anyway.
And what is your PhD in?
Well, they say philosophy, but it's clinical sexology.
And what was your dissertation on?
The dissertation topic was an analysis of the sexual sadism and sexual masochism themes in the works of Marcel Proust.
And in a sketch.
Okay. We could do another hour on this, on Marcel.
Sure.
I'm telling you, we could. You have a choice of picking your own topic, or you can ask your professor. So when Dr. Grenci called me one day when I was about ready to pick a topic, he said, "Have you got one?" I said, "No." I said, "Do you have one for me?" He said, he called me Carla, my nickname. He said, "Carla, if I pick your topic," he said, "you have to do it. You have no choice." Well, when he told me that, I almost had a heart attack. Who in the hell is Marcel Proust in the first place, right? And I called him. I said, he said, "Well, guess what? You were taught to research. You'll find out." And I had a very hard time for the first few months. I was just agonizing terribly over this because you don't quite get it. And then all of a sudden, boom, something happens and the whole world opened up and I knew what to do. Because most people that read his works, they don't see any S&M in there. Maybe a tiny bit in one book, or Sodom and Gomorrah, whatever. It's just a tiny bit. It's his works are full of it, full of it. And it took me with my research to find it, because most people don't even think of abuse or masochism, sadism, masochism, unless somebody's getting punched, hit, hurt, whatever that way. But most of it happens verbally and emotionally. That's how most of it happens. And I found it all. And that's how I got the award, Dr. Edwin, oh my gosh, I should have written that one down, Haberly Award of the best dissertation of the whole class.
Wow.
Because I nailed it.
Do you still read Proust?
No, I did enough in those days. I have a whole library of Proust, CDs of all his books, and oh my gosh. No, not now. I even wrote a book, one of them on your list there. Well, actually, it's on the back page, I think.
Yes. Marcel Proust Exposed.
Yes. And I wrote a book about it. And it's, it tells all. And all the other biographers of him, no biography is like this. None of them, because nobody saw that.
So in some respects, what you discovered there is the same as what a gay or lesbian writer will find out about their subject, that maybe there are 30 biographies on and they
Yes.
completely leave that out.
Yes, well said. Mm-hmm.
So there are similarities between the worlds where people are excluded from the mainstream, and so therefore their behaviors often go unnoticed or intentionally ignored.
Exactly. That's very true. Yeah. You're right.
And what is your relationship with the police now?
Well, a year ago in November, I told the detective after he gave back the DVD and took me off the homicide list, I said, could I come and give a guest appearance for all your police officers? I'll talk to them. I never heard back. No. I don't know what they think.
Well, I will make you feel this much better, an inch better.
Okay.
I worked extensively in human rights.
Oh, okay.
And my thing is to get people to know the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so I've gone to police departments and offered to work with them on implementing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into the way they do work.
Okay.
And most have quickly turned me down.
Yes. Isn't that something?
So human rights isn't a great interest.
They just, I don't understand. Oh, and that's another thing. You said, what would I tell people, what would I like to tell people the most? And something keeps escaping me. Oh, yes. I think people don't do enough personal research. They think, you have to go to college, you have to be doing a dissertation or a thesis to do research. No. Every individual, every one of us should be doing research on whatever subject matter interests us. At least we'll have a plethora of ideas, and it just opens up your mind and everything, and you can have better conversation with people. Pick a subject or subjects and do research.
Lifelong learning.
Lifelong learning. Don't stop when you leave college. Don't not start because you don't go to college. Everybody can do research at home. You have a phone, you have a computer, do it.
You have a library.
Libraries, yes. That's very important, to keep your mind always exposed to new ideas, new things, new laws, new attitudes, and human behavior.
Well, on that note, I'm going to say thank you. This was really thrilling, and I learned a lot, and what I think was most important for me is just recognizing how interconnected everything is.
It is.
That a world that I might not know still has great ties into the world that I do know.
Yes. Yes.
And that means it's incumbent on me to understand where those worlds collide, for good and for bad.
True. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.